Hello, my name is Diogene, and welcome to the International Education Week NSLI webinar on inclusion and diversity abroad. I am an intern at iEARN USA. Today's webinar is a panel discussion on the importance and value of inclusive and diverse cultural exchange. Before we begin, we're going to review a couple of features in this room so all attendees can navigate and participate seamlessly. Make sure to review your chat box settings to be set to all panelists and participants. And as we go off with the webinar, make sure to submit questions in the chat box and review polls. And we are on Facebook Live as well. For those of you who are joining us through Facebook Live, feel free to add your comments and questions there as well. And lastly, we are recording this webinar, so if you missed something or just want to watch it again, you can visit thislyinteractive.org and our YouTube page to watch it again. We were inspired to host this event during International Education Week, an initiative to celebrate the benefits of international education and exchange worldwide. This joint initiative of the U.S. Department of State and the U.S. Department of Education is part of our efforts to promote programs that prepare Americans for a global environment and attract future leaders from abroad to study, learn, and exchange experiences. So now we'll start with introducing our panelists. We have Hassan Fateni, Shraddha Joshi, Katie Hansen, Ryan Nguyen, and Lois Williams. And now we will transition into the panel discussion. First question, why is it important for exchange programs to foster an environment of inclusivity?
So I feel that it's important that exchange programs are fostering an environment of inclusivity because America as a whole is a very diverse country, and the people of our country have lots of different experiences. Therefore, if you want to truly be able to represent America and exchange what our culture really is about, you need to provide a space for people of all different backgrounds within America to be able to share.
On a related note, the whole point of an exchange program is to really put yourself out there and to be vulnerable as a student in sharing who you are, sharing your identity. And you can't do that unless you have that minimum basis of an environment of acceptance for all types of people.
To go along with what some other students were saying, I think that it's really important that programs like NSLI are inclusive and diverse because citizen diplomacy is a large element of going abroad, and especially through a State Department program. And so a lot of times we are like the first or only Americans that our host community is able to deeply engage with, and their understanding of America is influenced a lot by the media or by popular movies and such. And so as a result, I think it's really important that as people from diverse backgrounds, we really represent the face of American diversity and show that America is a lot more than what is seen at face value on the outside. And just forming relationships with people and giving them a new perspective on what it means to be American, even if we don't look like what the stereotypical American is, quote unquote, supposed to look like.
Yeah, so to kind of compound on all the other panelists' answers and kind of expand on it, thinking more broadly, a lot of these exchange programs like NSLI and other exchange programs kind of gear students towards careers that utilize language learning. And if we do have an environment inclusivity and represent a diverse cohort within these programs, we can also see that diversity translate into even broader careers and fields, so that it goes even further than just exchange programs, but also in jobs, in international programs, law, government, stuff like that. So it really has even broader implications when it comes to diversity.
Thank you, Lois. And moving on, what alumni resources did everyone use to leverage while you were preparing for the program?
So as many of you may be aware, there is a Facebook group called Ask NSLI Alum. And so I was really scouring that for information and just the other NSLI Facebook pages during my application cycle and leading up to submitting my application, and then once receiving my acceptance into the program. And so through that Facebook group, I was able to find a group chat that was, so there's one that was for the Korean applicants, which was the program that I participated in. And then there was also a group chat that I found that was just for NSLI applicants as a whole. And so I was really active in those group chats and used that as an opportunity to ask other people who are going through the same process, like about their experiences. And then because a lot of people in those group chats were also either applying for a second or third time, or they were alum that were now applying for the year program, things like that, they were able to really provide a lot of insight that I wasn't really able to find anywhere else.
Yeah, to piggyback off of that, I found the NSLI Interactive website to be very beneficial for finding out more information on each program and also experiences of like other alumni or other students that were on program, people of color, people from like my area of America in the Northeast, and also people who are in Taiwan, which was my program location. So I saw reading their stories or even watching their videos was a good way of seeing like what the daily life was like, as well as what I should expect to do while I was abroad. I definitely recommend everyone check that out after the video, after the webinar.
On a related note, in my case, I had not heard a lot about my countries. I was applying to the NSLI Arabic program for summer, and the two countries were the two countries were Jordan and Morocco. And at least in my family, those two countries, we never speak about them. So we did not know a single thing about the government or about the economy or about the people. And so I found the NSLI Interactive website to be particularly useful as well as the individual student blogs. And just reading about them really gave me insight as to what the life was like there and what people were like, what the culture was like. And it definitely prepped me for the program.
I think for me, both times around when I participated in the Jordan summer program and also now that I'm participating on the Arabic academic year program, reaching out to individual alumni was really helpful for me. And this year, like as I was preparing to go abroad for a year, I did that more with some of the students on the previous program, especially students of color, to ask them how their background had affected their experiences, and that in addition to blogs and social media, those all served as really helpful resources. But I would say, like, if you get an opportunity to reach out to specific alumni, maybe everyone has a very specific journey and everyone has a very different narrative, and so it's great to get multiple perspectives.
Yeah, for me, similarly to everyone, I also utilize NSLI Interactive a lot. I loved reading about people's individual experiences in different countries, not even just in Seoul or Korea. So I read everyone's interactive posts, blog posts, watched all the vlogs. Also was on Tumblr a lot because people posted about this on Tumblr. But I just really loved hearing people's individual experiences, especially when they related to me and what I might go through when I was abroad. So those kind of personalized experiences I relied on a lot when I was preparing for my program.
Thank you, everyone. And just to add on, I think we can all agree that there's sort of like a homey feeling with all the NSLI alum, and no matter which program we did. So I'm from New York City, and we have a program called SEO Scholars, and it's a program for like low-income students based in the city. And the summer after junior year, we go on experiential programs, and NSLI is one of the many programs we can apply to. And SEO nominates you to go to these programs. And before me, there were two alumna who had gone on NSLI, and both of them had happened to go to Korea as well. And it was just a very comforting time to like talk to them, for them to talk to my parents, and for them to be like, it's going to be fine. Korea is going to be great. Your child isn't going to be in danger. Having that very in-person relationship as well using NSLI Interactive and watching all the videos, talking to people on Facebook. I think like everyone was so willing to help, and I think I really appreciated that about the alumni network. And 2 years after the program, I can still say that that alumni network is very alive. Speaking of network, how did everyone build a community while you were studying abroad?
So I was pretty fortunate when it came to like the community building abroad, because since my host family was really good friends with another one of the host families that was hosting another student on my cohort, and since like they were already friends, like our two families would often do things all together. So that kind of, I guess, gave me a chance to interact on a more deeper, like personal level with other people in my host country that I most likely otherwise wouldn't have had the opportunity to really form these connections with. So like one of our first nights, I remember like we all went over to the other host family's house and like ate dinner together and then like walked around their neighborhood and things like that. So just having kind of that built-in net by the community that my host family was part of and just integrating myself in there really allowed me to find like my people and people to connect with.
So just to piggyback off of that, the host family is definitely one of the most unique parts of the program, because I think NSLI does a really good job of picking host families who really want to introduce their own culture, their local lives, especially food, which is always a good part of the program. And definitely that is great. But I know specifically like for the first like week when you're just transitioning to a new place, the NSLI cohort of like other students from America also is a really great support group. For after a flight, we all get pretty close together. I feel like coming from America, going to like Asia or Eastern Europe, it's a long flight. So you get to know other people in your group, and then you have like that friend base. So that right when you're in your host location, that you have like people to talk about, and also like shared experiences of like, oh, I'm also an American coming from high school in a new country that I've never been to before. And I think that's a great resource that a lot of students can have in addition to that host family aspect, where they can get this like introduction to local culture and language.
Well, at least for me, I found that I couldn't blend in at all in the community in Morocco, because obviously I don't look Moroccan or Arab at all. And so what I found to be useful was to sort of embrace that and not try to hide, but really take control of who I am. And that's not to say you should go running through the streets saying, oh, look at me, I'm different. But really just get a feel of who you are and don't be afraid to share things that are unique about you. I found that when I was walking on the streets through the markets of the Medina, which is the marketplace, a lot of people were staring at me, or some people would be curious and ask questions. My first instinct was to run away all the time because they're strangers. But I found that when I stood around, just took those couple minutes to stand and talk to them and tell them that I'm American, there are more than just white people in America. We have people of all backgrounds, all races, all ethnicities, and they were so shocked. They were amazed and they couldn't believe it. And in turn, they also shared some of their stories too. And I learned about the Sahrawis in Morocco, which are the people who come from the Sahara region of Morocco. And I learned about their experiences in being sort of minorities in Morocco. And it was really cool because we could relate on that level. So I'd say that in building a community, it's really essential to have that sense of your own identity and not be afraid to share it with others.
I think for me, I experienced this on the academic year program very differently from the summer program because we didn't have as much time in the summer program. So I used to spend most of my time with my host family and my cohort, both of whom I got very close to. But on the academic year program, I think that students have more of a responsibility or a need to build a community outside of just, the structures given to you, such as your NSLI cohort and your host family. And so I think like a few months into the program, I'm still trying to build members in a different way. So for example, I started teaching Hindi lessons at the American Language Center, which is something that I never expected to do, but it let me connect with my native language in a way that I wouldn't be able to do otherwise, and meet a lot of Moroccans who are interested in Indian culture and the Hindi language and the Urdu language. So that's been really exciting. And then I also just started doing some things for fun, like taking dance lessons at the Palestinian embassy, because it was something that I was interested in ever since I studied abroad in Jordan, and I wanted to continue doing that here in Morocco. So I think that finding extracurricular activities has been a great way for me to build a community while studying abroad, and I'm still working on it, but it's been nice to have that opportunity to connect with other Moroccans and Moroccans with similar interests with whom I can share my culture and also learn from them and really build my language skills throughout the process.
Great, thank you, everyone. And just to, I could definitely relate to what Hassan said, like spending 13 hours in a plane with somebody really like is a humbling, like one of the best community bonding experiences you could ever have. So next up, did you ever feel hyper aware of an identity you hold while you were abroad? And how did you approach misconceptions in your host country about what an American is versus the reality of diversity in the United States?
Like I mentioned earlier, I participated on the NSLI Korean program, which for my location was in Seoul, South Korea. And so as someone who is mixed race, half Korean, I kind of, I guess, had the privilege of, while being abroad, being able to kind of pass as Korean and kind of blend in. So I was like hyper aware of that identity in a way that I really never had been in America. Like in America, it was always, especially where I live, where there isn't a lot of diversity, it was very much like something I was constantly like aware of, like, oh, I don't fit in with the majority, I'm not part of the norm, like that sort of idea. But then versus when I was in Korea, it was a very different approach, because until I opened my mouth and I started speaking, then you could obviously tell that I wasn't at like native like citizen fluency by any means. So just, I guess, being able to just like visually at first glance kind of blend in made me like more aware of my identity in a way that I hadn't, I guess, been able to experience it in America. But then it also gave me the privilege of being able to like observe Korean culture from a different standpoint, since I wasn't instantly assumed to be always be a foreigner. Like it allowed me to connect in a way that I don't think I would have always had been able to otherwise. But then also, like, because I did sometimes like look Korean and people did sometimes perceive me as such, it was, I guess, an interesting thing that I was able to then bring up in conversation and be like, oh, like you're American? And I'd be like, yeah, my family, like half of my family is Korean, and like but I'm from America, and that's like, those are like two dual, I guess, identities that you get to hold and you get to share with other people in a way that they might not be expecting from Americans, which is always, it's interesting because people get to like, when you open up to them, like Ryan was saying, when you open up to them, they're going to open up to you. And I guess you can like share more than you might have otherwise been able to.
I think for me, I've noticed kind of like a spectrum of times where I was extremely aware of my identity, and then times where I passed off. So I had an experience at the airport when I first arrived in Morocco, where the immigration person told me that I wasn't American and that my nationality was Indian because my father is Indian. I mean, both my parents are Indian, but because my father was born in India, she made me change my immigration card or whatever. So it was a very strange experience, and I thought that would set the tone for kind of my year abroad. But essentially, overall, I've actually been kind of Moroccan. Didn't expect to blend in, but basically because of my skin color in most public places, I don't experience the same sort of racial harassment that other students of color experience on my program, and I also don't receive the unwanted attention or sexual harassment that other white females experience on my program. So it's actually been interesting for me to experience this new dynamic of privilege in my host community, because in America, I'm aware of my race and being a person of color in public spaces. But here in Morocco, when I'm not, actively talking to people, and when people aren't actively trying to figure out where I'm from, I sort of just blend into the background, and so I don't attract any unwanted attention. But at the same time, there are also situations where I walked into a classroom at a local high school yesterday, and people started shouting namaste, which is like the greeting in Hindi, and they were just like shouting it, and then they're shouting out nationalities like Indian, Pakistani, trying to guess where I was from. And so whenever I say I'm American, it's never really taken seriously, because people expect me to say where I'm quote unquote really from. And so that's kind of something that I've had to deal with, but it also gives me a good platform to start a conversation, because I can start talking about American diversity and how being American doesn't mean that you're white or blonde hair or blue-eyed, but it can also just mean that you have an immigrant background and you belong to more than one culture. And that's kind of what America stands for. So it's been interesting, because I've experienced a level of privilege, and I've been aware of that privilege, and how it's given me certain advantages in my host community. But I've also experienced some levels of racial harassment, even though they're definitely not as difficult as it is for some of the students on my program.
So I sort of have the opposite story. I come from Massachusetts, which I see some of you are from Massachusetts too. So even though there aren't many, I come from a small town, so there aren't many students of color in my town. The fact that I'm from Massachusetts means that seeing students of color isn't necessarily something odd or something different. But when I went to Morocco, everyone from the moment I walked through the airport doors and walked down the street, people were looking at me and they were wondering where I was from. And I could hear people saying Xinhua, which is like Chinese in either French or Arabic. Or they would come up to me and they would say konnichiwa or annyeonghaseyo, which are Japanese and Korean, although I'm Vietnamese Lao. And so I did sort of feel hyper aware pretty much the entire time. But after a certain point, I sort of got used to it and I didn't focus on it so much. So it became, for me at least, the opportunity to be there and be studying the language was what I focused on. I just blocked those interactions. And if anything, if people started to come up to me or really dive into, oh, where are you from? You can't be American. You don't look it. Are you sure you aren't Japanese? I took those opportunities, and also, just like Shraddha, started a conversation on the diversity of America and how there are so many different types of people in the US. Just like in Morocco, there are the Berbers and the French and the Moroccans and the Arabs, and it's a different dynamic, and it's really cool to be able to shine a light on that.
Yeah, and for me, similarly, I went to, like Katie, I went to Seoul, South Korea in 2017. And going into the program, I knew that Seoul, Korea in general, was a very homogenous country, and I knew I'd definitely stick out as a foreigner. And when I got there, as I expected, me and other Black students who were on program definitely got a lot of foreigner comments like, where are you from? Are you from Africa, etc., which I really did expect. And which was easy to kind of deal with. It was a good opportunity to share the diversity of America and like talk about where I'm from, etc. But something that was kind of a little unexpected and kind of harder to field was kind of heteronormativity in classroom instruction and in language practice. So as a part of the LGBTQ plus community, a lot of like language practices in class and with the something there with the teacher would revolve around like making hypotheticals about like future partners, and a lot of it was like, okay, girls, you talk about future husband or boyfriend, guys, you talk about future wife or girlfriend. And for a lot of people that wasn't the case, and in class it's kind of awkward to deal with when you are part of the community but you don't want to either out yourself or you kind of don't want to discuss the identity. So for me, I found that I was most comfortable, like not talking about the identity in class and kind of just going with instruction. But when we did have like supporter meetings, like little smaller meetings with college age students, where we just did conversational language practice, it was a lot easier to kind of discuss the identity, talk a little bit more about the diversity that's present worldwide, because there's LGBTQ people everywhere, and kind of just talk about that and introduce that in language practice and make it more normative just within our group. So that was a really cool part that I got to do when I was like abroad, just kind of talk to like a college age student about that, as well as like my host family. So I really enjoyed that part of this.
Right, thank you everyone for sharing. And then moving on, what did you bring back to your community in the United States after your experience abroad? Did this experience inspire you to go abroad again?
So, like I've kind of briefly touched on earlier, I'm from Iowa, so in the Midwest, and it's especially like where I go to school now for college, it's fairly rural, and it does not have like a lot of the diversity that you see in other places in America. And it just generally is a place where people haven't had the opportunity to have a lot of interaction with other cultures outside of like what is like the norm here. So after returning from Korea, like it was very much something that people were like curious about, because they hadn't really had the chance to learn about it, like Korean culture before, like other than maybe like knowing like, oh, K-pop is becoming popular or things like that. So like there's definitely, I think, a lot of misconceptions about the Korean Peninsula and the area that I'm from, and I mean also just in general, but like men mention like, oh, I'm going to Korea this summer to study, or oh, I just returned from studying in South Korea this summer. They'd be like, oh, North or South? Like, did you like, what was it like to live under a dictatorship? And I'd be like, first of all, like I went to South Korea, and then they're like, some people wouldn't even know that that was a place or that was a thing. So it's just like it was a really great, I guess, conversation starter to be able to, I guess, introduce to people and talk about an area of the world that they really didn't know much about, or what they did know were only like certain misconceptions about a very specific part. So it was just, for me, it was like very, I guess, like it was very rewarding to be able to share what I had learned with so many other people, because people have a thirst for knowledge and people want to learn about other things. And frequently it's just the case that they haven't had the opportunity to. So like I feel like it's my responsibility as someone who has had the opportunity to experience this and go abroad and learn about these other cultures to then share what I've got to experience with people who haven't had the opportunity.
So I can also chime in. So, oh, Ryan, go ahead.
No, it's all right. Cool.
Sorry about that. So what I took away from my experience was like originally before I went to Taiwan, I thought that Chinese was just like a class and I was just trying to get better at it. But I really liked studying the language, and I kind of like the challenge of like getting better at it and getting better at the tones, and also being able to have more interactions with people in Mandarin while I was in Taiwan versus like if I just spoke English while I was there. So then when I came back to the United States, I'm very fortunate to go to a school that has Mandarin classes. So it's also like a community of learners. And so I started a club where it's basically a competitive Chinese speech team. And like we also have like national essay contests that were entered in, different ways of like practicing our Mandarin together, as well as like speaking every Friday and having food, like trying Mandarin dishes, just kind of like sharing culture as well as language, primarily like language. But that's one way that I like to, I guess, share my experience with like my community in my school.
At least for me, I found that I brought the most change back to my family and my household. So I come from a family of 21 war refugees. Both my parents are not from the US. They're refugees from Vietnam who fled the Vietnam War. So at least for us, there's always been a really complicated relationship that we had with going abroad because of the supposed implications of danger and unrest that was perceived to be out there in the world in places other than US. So when I had announced that I was in the running for a scholarship to Jordan the first time, I received calls from relatives telling me that I would be killed by Jordan's government, or that I would be taken prisoner by jihadists. And my own dad, he asked me if the Muslims at school were brainwashing me, like how the communists did with the Vietnamese youth. And I was a bit shocked at seeing this, I guess, close-mindedness in my own family. And I'm sure a lot of people, a lot of you who have parents who don't come from the US can relate on some level. So I took it upon me to sit every single person down and show them the statistics and the stories and the people behind those facts that and the news stories that we see on TV. And I found myself blasting Spanish and Arabic music, our favorite songs, in the car, or playing videos of Arab YouTubers on the TV to show they're just like us. After doing all of that and going on NSLI and learning so much about the culture and Islam, I was able to bring all of that back and teach about them even further. And so for me, NSLI was an opportunity to change the perspective of every single person in my family, and that was incredibly valuable for me.
Going off of what some other students have said, there were a lot of misconceptions about Jordan and the Middle East the first time I went abroad with NSLI. And while my family was open-minded about it, they hadn't been exposed to like Middle Eastern culture before this. And in general, everyone in my community, amongst my friends, and just in general, my hometown and school had gotten their perspective of the Middle East from the media. So obviously, it was not a very accurate representation. But when I came back, I shared my favorite music with my friends. I would literally drag my family to my favorite falafel place in Austin. And so just like giving them a connection through food and music and just like small parts of the culture was really meaningful to me. And in addition, I continued to work with the refugee community in my city, which was something I had done before my first NSLI experience. And that let me really bring back the impact of my NSLI experience to a cause in my community, because I was able to use some of the language skills that I had developed for a positive purpose. And obviously, my initial NSLI experience definitely motivated me to go abroad again, and it influenced me a lot, which is why I'm in Rabat right now. And so I think it keeps on telling me my connection is unstable. So I'm sorry about that, but yeah, I was definitely like motivated to go abroad through my past experience, and that's why I'm here now.
And yeah, for me, so I'm from Georgia, which is in the South. I'm from a kind of smallish town. So when people heard that I was going abroad to South Korea, a lot of people, one, either didn't know where South Korea was or what it was, two, thought it was like North Korea, or three, just very unaware of the culture in general, and were very shocked and curious about why I wanted to visit Korea, somewhere that was so far and so different from my culture and the culture that we shared. And where I'm from. So I got a lot of questions from my friends, family, school about like, why Korean? Why that? So, and I was also lucky enough to go during like kind of when the height of K-pop was going. So a lot of people turning their attention towards Korea, as well as right before the Winter Olympics in Korea. So it was right at that prime point when I came back from my program, a lot of people were very, very curious about Korea and wanted to learn a lot more. So me and another friend who hadn't done NSLI but was fluent in Korean at our high school started a Korean club where people who were interested in Korean culture as well as the Korean language were able to join, learn a bit about the language and the culture, and we performed and had a stand at our school's international night. So that was a really cool experience just to get knowledge about Korea out into my community, into my family as well. And then in college, I also continued my studies of Korean, and I do plan to go abroad again, maybe hopefully back to Korea, but the NSLI experience in general just really gave me the the confidence to go back abroad, either by myself or in a program, and to kind of have confidence, like learn a new language, be in that new environment, and just be able to like bring a lot back, not just for myself, but for other people who might want to have the same experience, but is too scared to or doesn't know too much about it.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly piggyback off of like the whole traveling abroad again. I think like the NSLI program, specifically like I did summer, is a good way of kind of seeing what life is like in a new country that you otherwise wouldn't have the option to go to or like the opportunity to go to without NSLI. So like I was placed in Taiwan, and without the NSLI program, I don't think I would have ever have gone to Taiwan. But now I see myself applying for NSLI academic year again, and perhaps like going to Taiwan multiple times to see my host family or maybe even work there. So I think it's really an interesting experience that kind of like opened me up to the possibility of like going abroad to a part of the world that I never would have thought of going without the program.
All right, thank you for sharing, everyone. And to add on to what Lois was saying at the very end, this article might come out to Nestle Interactive later this week, but I wrote about Lois's and I's experience in Europe over the summer. As a low-income student, I didn't think that traveling would be as accessible without a program like NSLI or a university program, but I had the privilege to be able to save up and go to different European countries with my friend Lois, who I made during the career program. And I think that was a lot of fun. And I'm sure Lois can attest to the fact that even learning all these travel skills through NSLI helps so much being lost in Portugal or like not being able to speak a language. I think these are just skills that you take with you wherever you go, and it just really makes you a citizen of the world. So watch out for that NSLI Interactive post. And just to backtrack a little bit again, we're going to do another poll. So if we could take 30 seconds, the poll will appear on the screen, and we're asking, how did you hear about this webinar? So where did you get your, yeah. All right, thank you everyone for participating. And just as a reminder, the chat is open and we're gonna do a Q&A session at the end after one more panelist question. So if you wanna keep asking questions in the chat, we're gonna get to them at the end and you'll get to hear from us personally. And our last question before we get to the Q&A is, what inspired you to learn another language beside your native languages? And I can start this off. I'm a native Spanish speaker, and I think my main motivation for learning languages is really to get to know people. I think it's very accessible when you know someone's language and you get to hear like their knowledge directly from them and not through a buffer that translation can be. So like I would watch a movie, like a Korean movie or something, and a part of me would get annoyed. I'm like, that's not like the translation isn't exactly correct. So I think being able to have direct access to somebody's stories, somebody's like books, movies, entertainment, I think that really inspired me to learn a new language. And because I was already used to French and Spanish, which are all Romance languages, I wanted to do something radically different like Korean. I wanted to learn a new writing system, and Hangul really challenged me with that. And I was very excited to just like start with a fresh slate. And I also continue with my language learning in college. I took Korean first semester, and now I'm doing Portuguese. And with my major comparative literature, I'm like always constantly looking at language. So NSLI really like started off that process for me.
At least for me, a foreign language has always brought a sense of wonder. I remember my first languages are Vietnamese and Lao. And I remember the first day going into school, I didn't know how to speak a word of English. And when I walked in, I was alone. I didn't have any friends. But this one boy comes up to me, and out of nowhere, he comes up and he says, "Xin chào," which is hello in Vietnamese. And I was shocked. I was so in awe and I couldn't believe it. But a part of me felt so respected too, and so proud that someone took the time out to learn. I mean, he probably didn't learn the whole language. He probably like took his mom's phone and did Google Translate, hi Vietnamese. But I still felt so great, and that moment has stuck with me, and it's definitely pushed me to want to create that same sense of wonder for others when I speak their languages, specifically Arabic and Spanish. Something else that attracted me to the Arabic language specifically was, as Theo said, how different of the language can be in terms of the writing system. When I found out that Arabic was written from right to left, I was like, wow. And the whole grammar, Arabic grammar is crazy. It's crazy difficult. And I really want to take on that challenge and really learn about this whole lifestyle that's completely different to anything I've ever known in my own life. It's nothing like Spanish culture or Vietnamese culture. It's its own thing, and I really wanted to explore that whole huge part of the world, bursting with diversity and such a deep history that I really knew nothing about. So Arabic was really attractive to me in that sense.
My native language is Hindi, and I grew up speaking that in addition to English. And in high school and middle school, I was studying Spanish and French. And I kind of came across Arabic because I realized that there were a few words here and there that were similar between all three of my, or between like my non-English languages. So like Hindi, Spanish, and French would share just like a few words here and there. And I realized that Arabic was the link between that. So it got me really interested in Arabic just from the linguistic standpoint. And I started listening to music and learned more about the culture. And in the beginning of high school, I began working with refugees in my city, and there was a lot of need for Arabic skills. And so that's how I started self-studying, and I learned some basic phrases and then had the opportunity to go abroad with NSLI in the summer of 2017. And as Ryan was saying, Arabic grammar and the Arabic language is so complex and so interesting. It's obviously like, one of the most difficult languages for English speakers, and you feel that pretty hard once you get deeper into it. But despite the difficulties, it's just been so great to uncover new parts of the language. And especially like having gone to Jordan and now in Morocco, I've been able to experience two very different dialects, which are almost comparable to different languages because of the level of variety between. And so it's been exciting to be able to somewhat code switch between two dialects and try to develop my proficiency in two very different versions of the same language. And so that's one of the reasons I fell in love with Arabic, and one of the reasons I continue to love it to this day.
Great, thank you so much, everyone. That wraps up our question part of or at least the questions we had. And now we will transition into the Q&A with the audience. So we've already received a couple of questions that we're going to answer out loud. But if anyone has any other questions regarding our experiences abroad, it could be truly anything, please ask in the chat and we'll respond to them now. So to begin, someone asked, as a very protective parent, this entire application process so far has been very emotional. How have your parents and families handled you going abroad? So I can talk about this slightly. So my parents were also very protective, and I've only traveled with them. And before going to Korea, my last time going abroad with my parents was probably like 7-8 years ago. So it's been a while since I traveled. And Korea was like something I had no idea what it was going to be like, even though I had help from alumni. Being there on your own is completely different. But I think just the structure of NSLI and the fact that it's funded by the State Department, it has so much investment in your well-being and your safety. And I think that is very transparent. And from the start, like you build community, you make friends that have each other's back. On program in Korea, we had a phone that we had to keep on us at all times. It had to be fully charged. So any moment of the day, your resident directors could call you and check up on you. And you would also have everyone's contact information. So you could call up a friend wherever you went. So I think the aura of safety was there. And he had so many people you could reach out to if you needed help. So I personally never felt unsafe in Korea. And I think it's very natural for you going to a new place to feel insecure. And I think that's a part of the process. But I think just reminding yourself that you're going to be along with, depending on the program, 20, 30, 40 people who are going through the same thing. You're going to have your teachers, your host family. So you're going to have so many barriers of protection that really make you feel at home in your host country. I don't know if anyone would like to add to that.
Yeah, I can kind of chime in on that. So my parents were also a little worried because I originally applied for like the Mandarin program, so that could have been like mainland China or Taiwan, and they don't speak a single word of Mandarin. They don't know anything about the culture. They've never been there. So I think one of the big things that let them let me apply in the first place was that NSLI is sponsored by the United States Department of State, and I think with that is kind of like not like it's more like showing like the safety of the program, and it's also been a program that's been around for a couple of years now. So a lot of past people have gone on the programs, and we can see like on NSLI Interactive like their experiences that really like calmed my parents down, but also in on location within, I believe, like the first week we went to an American like diplomatic office in Taiwan. So they also gave us like a safety briefing at the orientation. There was a large emphasis on talking about safety. The parents were contacted often, just with even just like pictures or things that were going on in the program. So I think the communication aspect was something that made my parents like really happy about the NSLI program, because they knew even if I wasn't necessarily calling them every single day while I was like busy with my school and like the time difference, they still got to know like what was going on in the program, things about like just our excursions or class days. And I think that all is very helpful.
Just adding on to that. So as I mentioned before, I had a pretty extreme case of my family being against me going abroad on NSLI. And the first time, though I won a scholarship to study in Jordan, they actually made me reject it. And so I had to go through the application process again to win a scholarship from Morocco. But I did find several facts and key points relieved them of their worries a lot, such as the fact that NSLI is a program sponsored by the U.S. Department of State, as Hassan said. So it's legit. And I found that going throughout the program, staying in contact with my parents really helped them a lot as well. I tried to call them at least maybe twice a week through the phone that NSLI provided us. And NSLI was also extremely helpful in terms of communicating with our parents. Even if I didn't necessarily get emails from them, they apparently got tons of emails from NSLI themselves explaining what we were doing, where we were, and all the little details that could put their eases at rest. So.
All right. So another question that we received was, for those alumni who are beginners in their target language, how did you deal with not being able to understand what your host family was saying, if that was an occurrence? And did you use translator apps, or was there a different method that you found to be effective as well? So personally, I went into the program. So before you start program, you have about 5 weeks, at least on in my experience, is about 5 weeks of like pre-programmed language assignments that you had to do to try and get you like prepared for these like beginning interactions where you don't have a ton of language, but you still want to be able to communicate, for example, with your host family. Even though with that, yeah, I was definitely still very much a beginner in the language and did not have a lot of experience with it. So in my host family, they spoke some English, and then with me being able to speak some Korean, we kind of Konglish is what it's called when you like combine like Korean and English. So we were able to kind of like use that to get our points across. I think something that we really emphasized in our family, in our host family, was like you can communicate even without like you can communicate non-verbally, like even if I couldn't like even if I didn't have the Korean words like to explain what I was trying to say, like there's still different ways you can demonstrate that. Like if they are like, oh, are you hungry, for example, was a question that they would want to ask, like bringing food over and being like offering you a plate would be one way to like show that. But also, like since my host family did speak English, especially some English at the beginning of the program, they did really focus on, okay, like what can we speak to you in English that's like I guess the bare like what to like communicate effectively and make sure there aren't any misunderstandings. But also, yes, we did use translator apps, and I know some of my friends who were in families that did not speak English at all or like very limited, they relied a lot on translator apps and just like I mentioned earlier, nonverbal communication.
Yeah, and to like piggyback off of that, I was also in Seoul, South Korea, and I tested into as a novice beginner, and for me, I had a host sister, a host father, and a host mother. I could kind of communicate with my host sister the best. The next level was like my host father. We could sometimes communicate, but for my host mother, it seemed like the whole program, I never understood anything she said, and I don't know why, but that's just how it was. But we ended up having a really good relationship, even though I really could not understand her and she didn't speak English at all. And we were able to develop that relationship, as Katie said, through like nonverbal communication, just eating meals together, as well as like me working on my homework with her, us like discussing specific things that I had learned and that I knew that I would be able to understand. So yeah, just like doing homework and like assignments with my host mother. In Korea, one of our assignments was like to do like a little role play. So I did that with my host mom and my host sister. So it was really nice to just be able to communicate in that way. Like even if it was through like assignments, it was still a good way to build our relationship.
To go off of what some of the other students have said, nonverbal communication and just like generally being lost at the beginning of the program is totally normal, and it's something that everyone goes through. Having really weird like communication issues, you know, saying dumb things and like laughing about it is totally normal, and you end up learning a lot from it. In my first NSLI program, I was a complete beginner, and I had 4 young host siblings who were all under the age of 8. And they didn't speak much English at all, so they would just like speak to me in Arabic and want me to play with them and stuff. And that was honestly the best experience for my language, because they didn't realize, or they didn't give consideration of being a foreigner who didn't speak the language, so they just expected me to respond like a functioning human being, which I couldn't do at the time. So that really helped me, like it forced me to like learn the language much faster, or at least be able to communicate with them much faster. So even though it seems very overwhelming to go into an environment where you don't know the language at all, just know that the miscommunications are part of the learning process, and you'll come out of it with so much more than before. And to briefly touch on one of the questions about language proficiency, like how much your proficiency in your target language improves, it kind of depends on where you start off, because as you get into into advanced levels of most languages, it becomes harder and harder to progress because the difference between each level is increased. But on the NSLI website, I think under Alumni Insights or something, you can find some charts that show the oral proficiency interview averages for each program, like based on summer and academic year programs, and there are some sort of averages about the general improvement, so that can give you a good idea of how much the typical NSLI student would improve. And obviously at the beginning levels, and if you're starting off as a complete beginner, you can expect to make a lot of progress during your summer or academic year program. And then if you're at an advanced level, you would definitely be progressing, but slower depending on, you know, where you started.
Just to go back to the question about not being able to communicate with your host family, I found that in Morocco, you couldn't really use translator apps at all because they speak Darija, which is a very specific dialect of Arabic. So Google Translate didn't have that component in it. But what I found to be extremely useful for me, at least, was making friends who spoke Arabic and maybe a little bit of English too, and asking them about the common greetings that people would say, or just the basic phrases people would use every day. And I also found it extremely helpful to learn certain phrases such as, how do you say, or could you repeat this more slowly, please, in the target language you're trying to learn. And once you have that down, that enables you to ask a lot more questions about how to say certain things. Like once you have a friend who can speak a little bit of English, a little bit of Arabic, and you have those questions, you can ask them, oh, how do I say blah, 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 blah. And you can really go far with that. You can go very far.
Thank you, Ryan. And then moving on to some other questions. Have you ever participated in abroad programs before NSLI, and do you still keep in touch with the people you met? And to link that question with what was your favorite word or phrase in the language you were learning on your NSLI program? So to respond to the first part, as I mentioned before, one of my favorite parts of NSLI is the community. I mentioned before that I got to spend my summer, or part of my summer, with Lois. Whenever people are visiting New York, where I live, they always hit me up and like we get dinner or something. Just last semester, my friend Damari was also visiting New York, and I had to have food with her. So we're in constant communication with people, and I think the bonds you form are really long lasting. And my favorite word or phrase in Korean was definitely "깎아주세요," which just means "give me a discount, please." I don't know if anyone else would like to share their favorite phrase.
My favorite phrase was 给我一杯珍珠奶茶, which was like, give me a cup of bubble tea. And that was a pretty big one at like night markets.
At least for me, I found myself saying "Hajibunin Bazef," which is "this is so delicious" in Arabic, Darija, to my host mom a lot. Every meal I would say that, and she would just beam up in the brightest smile. So I love that.
For me, my favorite phrase in Jordan was "ewa," which basically means like exactly, or it's like a emphatic yes, and my host parents would say that if I got a word right, or just to like encourage me. And it was just like the word that people say when like you're partying and dancing and you just repeat it. So that was like my favorite word. And in Darija, I'm still looking for one specific favorite word, but in general, Darija, I love Darija, but still looking for that one word.
I love Darija too.
All right, everyone. It's about 6 Eastern now, which means that our webinar is coming to an end. And I know many of our questions were left unanswered, so some of the panelists will share our contact information into the chat. I'll share mine personally. So if you want to reach out for anything at all, I went to Summer Seoul, Korea 2 years ago. I can provide info on that, and you heard what programs other people did. So please reach out to us. We're happy to help. And lastly, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope this panel helped future students pursue cultural exchange while balancing different identities and backgrounds. We encourage you to interact with us on social media. You can find us on our website, nsli4youth.org. You can read more or submit your own story at nsli-interactive.org. Also, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and that is all in NSLI, which is NSLI-Y. So the application for the 2020 to 2021 NSLI program cycle has now closed. But we strongly encourage you to apply to the NSLI program if you haven't already, when the application reopens next August. If you have already applied or are interested, a parent or educator, we encourage you to share about the program within your local schools and networks. For any current students or alumni, if the topics discussed tonight resonate with your own experiences on program, we highly encourage you to share your story with us on nsliinteractive.org. So thank you so much, everyone, again. Again, our contact information is in the chat. Feel free to reach out to us, and we really hope you enjoyed this webinar. I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.